My name is Ray Levering. I am the Dean of the William O. Ridgway College of Arts and Sciences. It's wonderful to see so many people here, especially on a day like this. But you're in for a treat. This is going to be a great story about an amazing woman. This is one of Evansville's own. She was also a professor at the University of Evansville between 1963 and 1974. She was very involved in the local YWCA. And could I just see hands? Is there people here, I know there are some people, who actually knew Mary Ellingson? Wonderful, wonderful. We are fortunate enough today to have her daughter, Barbara. She's here joining us and really is responsible for some of the research which went into this. So it's wonderful to have her and her husband back here today. So our speaker today, Dr. Kaiser, is a professor of archaeology at the University of Evansville. He earned his PhD in archaeology from Boston University and has worked on archaeological projects in Greece, Spain, Italy, Britain, Israel, Rhode Island, Indiana, and on the Caribbean island of Nevis. Most of his research is focused on Roman urbanism and the role of streets in creating cityscapes. He served for 2 years as a lecturer in the prestigious Archaeological Institute of America's lecture series, traveling across North America to discuss his work with diverse audiences. Dr. Kaiser's published works include scholarly and popular articles, as well as 2 books aimed at a scholarly audience. Those are The Urban Dialogue, an analysis of the use of space in the Roman city of Evansville, Spain, and Roman Urban Street Networks. His third and most recent book, which he's going to be discussing here today, is Archaeology, Sexism, and Scandal, the long-suppressed story of one woman's discoveries and the man who stole the credit from her. So if you would please join me in welcoming Dr. Kaiser.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? I can go louder if you want. That's the magic microphone. There, how do you like that? Is that better? Yeah. All right, good. Well, thank you, Ray. I appreciate the introduction. That was very kind of you. And thank all of you for coming out. I did not expect this many people to come out today, considering you all risked your lives to get here. I appreciate that. That really means a lot to me, I have to say. What I'd like to talk to you about today then is a pretty interesting discovery. I have worked in the field for years. I've made lots of interesting discoveries in different parts of the world, but this particular discovery, this photo album and the letters that accompanied it and news clippings, I didn't have to go to anywhere exotic to find. It was actually outside of my office for 2 years and I didn't even know it. I walked past it past the shelf for 2 years and didn't even see it. But finally, one day after I'd worked here for 2 years, I noticed the photo album up there and pulled it off the shelf just to look at it and was quite surprised at what I found. First of all, the pictures, but then also the letters, all of which pertain to something that I knew a lot about. This was one of the first photographs that really caught my attention as I looked at that particular photo album. I recognized this site immediately. This is the site of Olympus in northeastern Greece. It may not look like much to you, but to an archaeologist, this is an exciting picture. And we've all seen this picture before, we archaeologists. There's where Olympus is in Greece. Just to give you some idea, so Athens is down here. You might have the sort of site of Corinth, and then Olympus up there. The reason I was so excited when I noticed that picture and figured out what it was a picture of is because Olympus is famous. It's famous among archaeologists for excavations that were conducted there between 1928 and 1938. There were 4 different seasons, all done by a guy by the name of David Robinson from Johns Hopkins University. The purpose of his excavations was something different for his day. He was one of the first classical archaeologists to focus an excavation on houses. Now that might sound like a really basic thing to us, right? Of course you're gonna dig up houses, but it didn't occur to people so much prior to this. They've been mainly interested in things like theaters and temples. They really like temples, public types of architecture. People were not that interested in houses, or it hadn't occurred to them how much information you could get about the ancient Greeks, about daily lives and things like that from excavating the houses. So what Robinson did was pretty revolutionary, pretty exciting for his day, which is what has made him famous until this day. His excavations at Olympus, what he was able to do there with a massive crew of Greek workmen was to uncover more houses than had been excavated at any site prior to this or since. Nobody has excavated as many Greek houses as Robinson did in his 4 seasons at Olympus. When I was a graduate student, so his last field season was in 1938. When I was a graduate student in the 1990s at Boston University studying classical archaeology, I had to read his publications, which was no mean feat, as it runs 14 volumes. All right, students, when you complain about your reading load in class, okay? Yeah, remember this story, okay? This is just one of the volumes, one of the 14. So they focus on different things. Different volumes focus on different things. Some are about architecture. This particular one is about terracotta figurines. Some are about coins, vases, things like that. So I actually had to read all these. That's how famous these excavations are. Every analysis of Greek domestic life, of the daily life for the Greeks, it all starts with Robinson's excavations at Olympus. So that's why this was a really exciting discovery for me. What I also discovered, though, was, I don't know how well you can see it. You can see there's a figure right there in this photograph. I had seen this photograph before, the exact same angle, exact same shot, but there were no people in it. In this photo album, there was just one image, and that is Mary Ellingson. And here's another image of her where you can actually see her face. She's the figure on the left there. This photo was not labeled, so I don't know who that is on the right. But that is Mary Ellingson with her fur-trimmed coat ready to dig. She looks very serious there, doesn't she? She is the one who collected all of this information, who put together this photo album, who gathered, wrote the letters home, and then she gathered them together to keep as a scrapbook. She had newspaper clippings, all these wonderful things that I started to go through and started to read, and got to then learn about this excavation from sort of behind the scenes. As I say, it's a famous excavation that you read about in the publications, but they're kind of dry. Here she had funny and interesting stories, all of which I got to read about, which certainly made this a very fun and interesting discovery. There was one more piece of the story, however. I did uncover something very surprising. There were a couple of clues among all of this material that I slowly started to put together, and it took me years to actually figure it all out. But what ended up happening was I uncovered a pretty big scandal. The biggest plagiarism scandal yet reported in classical archaeology, perhaps in all of archaeology. That's not what I was expecting when I pulled that photo album off the shelf. So I'd like to tell you about all of that today, about Ellingson, about Robinson, and also about the scandal that links the two of them. But before we get to scandal, I know scandal's fun, but before we get to that, let me introduce some of the characters here, particularly Mary Ellingson and her mentor, David Robinson. This is Ellingson. This is her graduation photo when she graduated from college. She was born in Edmonton on September 21st, 1908. Her maiden name, her given name was Helen Madeline Mary Ross. A name I don't think she liked because when she got married, she changed her name to Mary Ross Ellingson. She went to college at the University of Alberta. She went to study law, that was her plan, but she took a course in Greek and she was hooked. She loved it. She loved the classics. She loved the classical world and decided that's what she wanted to study. So once she graduated in 1930 and she's wearing her graduation gown here from the University of Alberta, that fall then, she began graduate school at Johns Hopkins University because she wanted to study under David Robinson. Even though he was not as famous as he is today, he was certainly well known for his work as an archaeologist. And here is a nice picture of Robinson at Olympus. Robinson was a very, very interesting guy. He, by some bizarre coincidence, was also born on September 21st, just like Ellingson. They shared the same birthday, only 28 years earlier, so he was a little bit older than her, in 1880. He was a child prodigy. He was a master of languages. He could pick them up just naturally, really, really quickly. And because of that, he began his work as an undergraduate just before his 14th birthday. That's when he entered the University of Chicago. He completed his undergraduate degree and then entered the graduate school at Chicago just 4 years later, so just before his 18th birthday. So he was quite a brilliant guy, certainly very talented with languages as well. He supplemented his graduate work by going to Germany. He attended classes at a couple of different German universities. At that time, in the late 19th century, Germany was the place. That's where you went if you wanted to study the classics and classical archaeology and classical languages. So he attended a couple of different universities in Germany. Of course, he picked up German along the way fluently, because that's the kind of guy he was. He also spent time at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. He, oh, there, Andrew's cheering for that. He used to work for that, right? He got his first taste of archaeological field work in one of their excavations at the site of Corinth, which I just showed you a moment ago. He loved archaeology as soon as he went to Corinth, and he decided that's what he wanted to pursue. So he taught archaeology, wrote about archaeology, and then in 1904, Johns Hopkins University hired him. At that time, they did not have a full-time archaeologist, and they really wanted to build up their archaeology program. So he went there, he got the job there, and he remained for more than 40 years. He was a permanent fixture there. And he was a force to be reckoned with. He built up that program to make it the largest in North America. So people came from all over, even from Europe, to come study under him. That's how big a program that he made this here at Johns Hopkins. Ellingson and Robinson first met in the fall of 1930, as far as I can piece together. And she must have charmed him right away. He seemed to have really liked her from the get-go, because almost immediately after he met her, he invited her to come join the staff at Olympus the next season, 1931. He was going to go back and wanted her to participate. Now, what was it about her? Why was he so taken with her? I guess I can't speak for him, and he's dead, so he's not speaking for himself. But I think I have an idea by reading her letters. And let me just read you one quote, if I can find it here. I forgot my notes at home, so it's a good thing we have books here. Let's see. Or not. Yeah, here we go. So let me read you a quote from one of her letters. This particular letter is one that she wrote while on board the ship the Roma. What you see on the left, top left there, is a photograph of the Roma. Down below is a postcard showing the Roma. She and her classmates, two of her fellow classmates from Johns Hopkins University, were all going together to Olympus, so they were crossing the Atlantic. And they were sharing a third-class cabin. None of them had much money, so they were in third class. And the two people she was sharing the cabin with both went on to become very prominent in the field. One was named Sally Freeman, and another Gladys Weinberg, who, if any of you know any archaeological training, certainly know Gladys Weinberg. Let me just read you a little bit of her letter that she wrote home from the ship. And it tells you a lot about her personality on several different levels. She writes, "We had quite a lark the other night after the captain's dinner party. We broke a wire on the lock, keeping us from second class, and crawled under the canvas. I was in the lead, and when I rose up from ungraceful position on hands and knees, I was face to face with one of the ship's officers. Nothing daunted, I waited till Sally and Gladys got through, and we marched up to the top deck. The officer evidently decided we were harmless. After making ourselves at home in second class, we watched our chances and got through the first class gate, which was much easier. We didn't have to crawl under any canvas. I like that. She broke a lock, but she's concerned about the canvas. Let's see, we finally got to the top deck of first class, which is really beautifully fixed up. Then we decided we wanted to play shuffleboard. Because of course, when you sneak into first class, that's what you want to do. I don't know. I guess I need to sneak into first class and find out. Let's see. She goes on to say, let's see. We got the poles and quoits, or whatever they're called, and started to play. We played until a nosy deckhand came around, and then went off to report us. Then we gracefully retired under the canvas again, so that when an officer came to put us off, we weren't there. Fooled him. I think you start to see why Robinson, what he saw in her. I'm certain he was a delightful woman, as you can tell from quotes like that from her letters. Ellingson and Freeman and Weinberg, once all of them got to Olympus, they did get straight to work. And here's a great photo of Ellingson and her crew in the field. These are the supervisors. They're on a lunch break right here. That's Ellingson on the left standing. That's Gladys Weinberg right there, who seems to be reading something. For those of you who know anything about Greek archaeology, that's J. Walter Graham right there. That's George Milanos right there. Names that some of you know, and some of you should know, students. Robinson recognized immediately that Ellingson had a gift for excavation. She knew what she was doing. She really had a nose for the dirt. And so he started giving her as much responsibility as he was giving the men, which was not typical for that time. Eventually, she was managing up to 60 Greek workmen at a time, which is pretty good because she didn't speak much Greek. Don't know how she did that. What you see in the bottom here is one of her photographs of just one of her Greek work crews. So she was managing all of these guys and did a pretty impressive job of it. The other thing that all of the staff had to do at Olympus, so they had to work out in the field, they had to supervise the excavation of certain trenches and houses and things like that. But another responsibility for every staff member was also to catalog some category of artifact. And the category of artifact that Ellingson got, what she wound up cataloging, oh wait, I got ahead of myself. Here's just one picture of one of the houses she worked on. What you see up there is, on the top right, is the very first house that she excavated. And she was very proud of that. She actually wrote that into her photo album, my first house. What you see on the bottom left is a plan of this house that actually comes from the excavation at Olympus Volumes. So that is her house. That is the first house that she excavated. She excavated more, but she was very proud of her first one. What she was put in charge by Robinson of cataloging were terracotta figurines. And this is one of her photos that I think she intended to use as a study photo once she got back to Baltimore. These figurines are, they're very different. They vary in size. Some are like maybe less than an inch high. They get to be as much as maybe 10 inches high. So there's quite a difference in these. They're made out of terracotta, they're made out of clay. There are different types of figures, female heads, sometimes just a female head like you see on the left there, women holding babies, women who are just seated. We don't always know what all of these figures stood for. Some are clearly some mythological figures, some are goddesses, but sometimes we just don't know what these represent. Ellingson loved looking after these. She writes over and over and over again in her letters about how lucky she feels that she's the one who gets to catalog the terracottas. And she just over and over again says, they're so beautiful, I can't believe how beautiful they are. But there's one figurine in particular that she writes about. It's a dancing figurine, a figurine of a dancer that she was particularly enamored of. Now she doesn't quite say why, and she doesn't describe it, so I don't know for certain which one it was, but I have a really good guess that it's this one right here on the left. just based on the way she describes it. Here's a close-up of what that figurine looks like. I know it's not the greatest photo, it's kind of fuzzy, but you get some idea of what it looked like. She did say that this one she loved so much was a dancer figurine, and that's what we have represented here. It's a woman dancing, and that big circular thing that she's holding, it's a tambourine of some kind, or a drum or something, that she's beating in time to the music as she dances. I think this is the one that she describes in her letter that she was so excited about. Because she liked this one so much, the reason she liked this one so much is because it had traces of paint on it. Now this is really unusual. These terracotta figurines were painted, we know that, but rarely does the paint survive. And this was just a very unusual situation, just whatever was happening on the ground at that point. The paint was preserved well enough that a lot of it was missing, but she could actually figure out what the colors were, how this thing was painted, which led to an idea. Now I don't know who came up with this idea, but the results are pretty interesting. So I have to digress for just a second. This is not from from her photo album. This rather brooding-looking fellow you see on the left is a famous artist. This is a guy by the name of Georg von Peschke. Georg von Peschke. He was a well-known artist at the time, working in Greece. He grew up in Austria. He was Austrian nobility, but he didn't like Austria. He loved Greece, married a Greek woman. So Robinson convinced him to come on the Olympus excavations. Now the reason that at that time you needed a good artist on your excavation is because there wasn't color photography. There was not high quality color photography like we have today. And so if you wanted a full color reproduction of an artifact or a feature or something, you would put the artist on it. What you're looking at on the right is not a photograph, that is a watercolor. That is a watercolor that von Peschke drew of one of the mosaics, probably the most famous mosaic that was found at Olympus. He drew every single stone exactly where it was, and then colored every single stone its original color. It's a pretty impressive thing to do. It's hard enough to be an artist, but to copy something as perfectly and exactly as he did, I think is pretty impressive. The reason I bring up von Peschke is because he was also quite charmed by Ellingson. That is really clear. He drew this caricature of her. She was the barber on the expedition, so that's why he gave her the scissors and the comb. But if you look carefully, you see he actually signed it here, G.V. Peschke. So he clearly liked her. They certainly got along. Ellingson even mentions in her letters that he was planning on doing a painting of the crucifixion, and he needed a Mary Magdalene. And so he asked her if she would model for him as Mary Magdalene. She's the only excavator I ever know who's also been a model, and in the field no less. That's, but so she agreed to do this modeling. I just happened to meet a guy who is he's an art historian, and he's the world's leading expert on von Peschke. I didn't know there was such a person until I just happened to run into him. And we started talking, and I told him this story, and he got really excited, and he asked me to send him the exact quote from the letter, which I did. And then he emailed this to me. He said he thinks this is the painting that she was describing in that letter. I don't think ever saw the final painting, but this figure right here, that's Mary Magdalene, and he believes that that is Mary Ellingson. Unfortunately, this is only a black and white. It was originally a color painting, but it's in a private collection, and he could only get a black and white picture of it, so that's the best we can do. But pretty interesting. So you can see they got along very well. Which brings me back to this figurine. I don't know if it was his idea, I don't know if it was her idea, or if it was Robinson's idea, but somebody came up with the idea of trying to paint this figurine, trying to represent what it looked like at the moment it was completed, when it was brand new and they just had finished painting it. Now I'm certain, I don't know whose idea it was, but there's no doubt in my mind that Ellingson helped von Peschke. They certainly got along very well, they worked well together. She must have pointed out to him the designs on the tambourine, the specific colors. You can see they painted in fingers, things like that. And I'm sure she was able to point all of that out to him and help him get the exact right colors. This then is what he came up with. This is his watercolor. And seeing that, I think you can see why she got so excited about working with these figurines. They really are beautiful, especially when you see them like this. The whole crew at Olympus were living in a Greek village, and Ellingson apparently loved that. She was really interested in the local Greek culture and even wanted to participate in it. There are notes in her letters. She's like trying to remember Greek words. She writes them down, and she writes in detail about some of the customs of people. And there's actually a letter that goes along with this, and a couple more photos I can show you that go along with this. And I just want to read you another quote, if I can find it. Oh, I turned right to it. That's good luck. Let's see. So she writes, I'm going to read you, this actually illustrates the story I'm going to read you. You can see Ellingson right there. That's David Robinson right there. And this is the groom. You're going to hear about the groom in a moment, but that's him. So she writes, well, such excitement as there was on Sunday. Yours truly rode in a wedding procession, and right beside the bridegroom in the place of honor at that. The Greeks still have a custom, as they had in ancient days. The bridegroom sets out from his home in his cart and horse with 2 other carts, and the father riding on horseback in front. He drives to the home of the bride, and she gets into one of the carts with her attendants, 3 women, 2 small girls, and her mother, and the party starts back again. Well, here's where I came in. Davy, that would be David Robinson. I find it hard to believe anybody called him Davy, but here's the evidence. All right. Davy and I walked over to the next village, Ayas Mamas, to look at some inscriptions on stone. We were walking along the road when we heard the tramp of horses' feet and the rhythmic song of the blocks approaching. Turning around, we saw horses, carts, people, banners approaching at a great rate of speed, much shouting and firing of guns and pistols. The party stopped when they got to us. They got out, they passed the cognac around, and doesn't Greece sound wonderful? And invited Davy and me to come along, which we did, I being very anxious to ride in a bridal procession. The groom got out, so we rode in his cart, me on the front seat between the driver and one of the male attendants. Now, I must explain about these carts. There is a board across the front to sit on, but no place to put your feet or brace yourself. Well, off we went, me feeling very tickled the while. Bump number 1. Mary slips back a little on the seat. Pistol shot number 1. Horses lurch forward. Mary falls back into the cart upon Davy and the other members of the bridal party. After resuming my original place, on we go. Bump number 2. Mary slips back a little. Pistol shot number 2. Horses lurch forward, and Mary, by dint of a few friendly pushes from the back, retains her seat. Oh, I forgot to say that one of the men riding in the back of the cart told Dr. Robinson he would like to marry me and thought I was very beautiful. This being my 3rd proposal during the course of the afternoon. She was really popular, wow. Again, how many of you, I know some of you women, you've been on excavations, how many of you were proposed to? Bravo. Gee, where was I? Finally, we arrived at Marapato, where the whole village was out to greet us, much firing of pistols, etc. Andoni, the cook, was out to see it too, and when he saw Davy and me sitting up in the front cart, as large as life and twice as natural, well, his eyes just about popped. After recovering his first surprise, he made one dive for the house and shrieked at the bunch, "Monsieur Robinson, Mademoiselle, marriage!" They didn't know what it was about and wondered if Davy and I were eloping, Mrs. Robinson being away in Thessaloniki for the weekend. So she certainly got to know the local culture as well, perhaps more intimately than she had anticipated. The season, of course, came to an end. She returned to Johns Hopkins University. She returned to Baltimore. When she got back, she was writing her master's thesis. She decided to write it about those figurines that she had cataloged, those terracotta figurines. And she knew she was going to do that while she was at Olympus, which is why she also made some plaster casts. We have about a dozen of them here that were part of the collection that was donated to the university. So she brought these back to Baltimore in order to help study them. By the way, just as a digression, I forgot to mention how we have all of this. When Mary Ellingson died in 1993, her daughter, Barbara, donated all of this material to the university, so that's why we have it now. If you are interested in seeing actually these two figurines and the photo album and some other materials as well, it's all on display now in the library. Before you leave, if you go to the library, it's just back behind the circulation desk right when you walk in. You can actually see all of this as well. So we put it up on display for you. So she wrote her master's thesis about these terracotta figurines. Most of the thesis is a chronological catalog. She was just trying to date them and figure out how styles had changed over time, which is pretty typical archaeology. But she did something else that was rather innovative and rather different for her time. She got really interested in where exactly these figurines came from, what their context was when they were excavated. Now, it was widely assumed at this time that all of these figurines were for religious purposes only. And that is because people had only dug temples, right? And that's where they found the figurines, so they must be religious, right? Now, they had also dug cemeteries, and they found them there, but again, they seemed to have some kind of religious connotation, or at least that was the assumption. What Robinson was finding, and Ellingson was the first to point it out, was that they were finding these figurines in houses. Now, some of the places, she looked not just at which houses, she looked specifically at which rooms in the houses and what artifacts were found in those rooms. Some of the figurines, she concluded, were part of a household shrine, so they did have religious connotation, but others had no religious connotation. She thought they were just being used for decoration. They were just decorating their rooms with them. Others, she came to the conclusion, were actually being used as toys, which was a radical new idea. People didn't pay attention to children at that time. They didn't exist, so, so she had to bring children back into the archaeological record. She completed her dissertation in 1939. Her dissertation was an expansion of what she had worked on for her thesis. She looked at figurines found in the other 3 seasons at Olympus. She also incorporated figurines found at other sites across the Balkans, across northern Greece. Again, she studied where these were found and elaborated on some of these ideas about the non-religious uses of these particular figurines. So it's pretty interesting and innovative work that she was doing. It is clear from the correspondence between her and David Robinson that she intended to publish her dissertation. She was very proud of it and excited about it, but life got in the way. She graduated from Johns Hopkins in May of 1939. In that same month, she became engaged to Rudolph Ellingson. I think some of you knew Rudy Ellingson, right? Yeah, some of you did. Who worked for Meade Johnson for a long time. He was actually, at that time, when she met him, he was a chemist. He had done his graduate work and just gotten his PhD in chemistry at Johns Hopkins. And so they had met there. They were engaged in May, they were married in August, and that's when he was offered the job here in Evansville at Meade Johnson. And so they moved here in 1939, and then this is where they stayed. She did want to publish her dissertation even though she came to Evansville, that seems clear. But of course, as a new bride, that sort of slows down your intellectual pursuits. There's a lot to be done, setting up a household, moving, all of that. Also, World War II started and she got involved in some relief efforts as well. She was very active in that. And then something else that slowed her down. I guess I don't need to tell you that Barbara doesn't look like that anymore. You were a cute baby, all right? So of course, you know, you can see what happened then to the project of publishing the dissertation. Just life got in the way. But that doesn't mean that her academic career was over. I find it very interesting that the year that Barbara turned 18 is the year that Mary Ellingson came back to academia. She got a full-time job here at the University of Evansville. And here are just 2 pictures that I took from yearbooks from different years. You can see her hairstyle evolving and her glasses. But she taught in the foreign language department. She taught Latin. She taught in the English department. She taught Greek and Latin words. the derivatives that we have in English from Greek and Latin root words. That was a popular type of course that was taught back then. So she remained here from 1963 until 1974, and that's when she retired from the university, and then of course she passed away in 1993. We won't go there yet. So I had gone through all this material, the photographs, the letters, the newspaper clippings, and I really had a great time reading all this stuff, I have to say. The last thing I tackled, though, was a big, thick document. I put it off to last because it was a big, thick document. It was her master's thesis, was included among all this material that Barbara had donated to the university. So finally one day I said, I just got to do this. I've read the rest. So I sat down at my desk, I opened up the cover page, looked at the very first page of text, and I stopped cold. A chill went down my spine, and I said to myself, I've read this before. I know that I've read these words before. But I also know I've never heard of Mary Ellingson, which gave me pause. So what I did to find out what was going on is I found which volume in the Excavations at Olympus series recorded the publication of the terracottas found in 1931. I got that out of the library. I went home, sat down at my kitchen table. I put Robinson's publication. There was his name on the front down. I put her thesis down right next to it. I opened up to the first page of each and I started reading, and the words were nearly identical. Nearly identical. I turned to the next page, same thing. Next page, same thing. I started counting words to see how many words were repeated, to see if I was just imagining this or what was going on. It was an average of 95% repeats exactly what she wrote in her thesis. This is his published work. Only his name appears on the cover, and nowhere, not even the acknowledgments, does he mention her thesis, her work. Well, this got me very curious about her dissertation. So I contacted Johns Hopkins University. I got a copy of her dissertation. I got a copy of Excavations at Olympus 14. Same thing, I sat down at my kitchen table, I opened them up, and again, the first chapter and a half of volume 14 repeats exactly what she wrote in her dissertation. Just to give you a visual for what this means, what I've done here is I've selected a random paragraph, just completely a random paragraph from Excavations at Olympus 7. So this was Robinson's publication of Ellingson's thesis. Every word that is now read repeats exactly what was in her thesis. And you can see from the changes here, he did a slightly different numbering system, and I found some editorial changes, but that's it. 95% of the text repeats exactly what she wrote. And she did not get the credit. He took the sole credit for this. This got me curious as to how unusual this was. I told this story to some older scholars, and they said, oh, this went on all the time. But I wanted to confirm that. I didn't actually believe that. I wanted to know if that was actually true. So what I did is I investigated what was going on with women graduate students and women scholars in classical archaeology, in anthropological archaeology, and in the sciences in the United States on either side of World War II, since that's when Robinson published Ellingson's work. And what I did is I looked for two things. One, I just looked for names on title pages, names on publications, to see if there were names of women, and I found lots of them. I also looked for stories of people who transgressed the rules in order to figure out what the rule was at that time. And what I found was that there were principal investigators who would publish the work without proper acknowledgement of their non-graduate student female research assistants, and also of their wives. But I could not find a single case of anybody who published a woman's thesis or dissertation as their own. I couldn't find a single case of that. And since I did find examples of the others, it just leads me to believe it didn't happen. I can't find any evidence that anybody else had ever done this. It tells me that, I'm not sure, there are certainly unscrupulous people out there, there are certainly unscrupulous principal investigators, but I think that the reason nobody else did it is because they knew they'd get caught, or were afraid they'd get caught. It's one thing if you're talking about your wife, or you're talking about a research assistant, you work together in the lab, you work together in the field, some person does this part of the analysis, some does this part, who's to say who did which, it all gets fuzzy, right? There's no documentary evidence. Same with writing an article or even writing a book. Who contributed which parts, who changed which parts. It's all kind of fuzzy, right? And it boils down to he said versus she said, but not when it comes to a thesis or dissertation. All anybody would have to do is what I did. You just put the two documents down, you compare them, and you see which one was published first or which one was completed first, and you can figure out who copied whom. It's too easy. And so that's why I think nobody else ever did it. I think Robinson was incredibly arrogant. He just thought nobody would ever look. He really thought that he would get away with it. And so that's why I think he did it. He then did, this is the cover page then of Olympus 7. This is Ellingson's master's thesis that you see here. We don't know, we have no documentary evidence for how she felt about this, seeing her master's thesis in print with his name on it and without hers. He certainly didn't ask her permission, and we don't know how she found out. However, there's one thing that I don't know this for sure, but I suspect it must have galled her a great deal. What Robinson did with each one of the 14 volumes of excavation at Olympus is he put in a frontispiece. So he put a picture opposite the cover page that somehow illustrated what was going on in the volume. And the frontispiece that he chose to illustrate this particular volume, her master's thesis, was this. It was her painted terracotta figurine. She is the one who found this. She's the one who measured its location. She was the first person to lift it out of the ground. She cleaned it. She photographed it, as we saw. She wrote about it in her catalog. She wrote about it in her thesis. She knew this piece intimately. And I think she worked with von Peschke on creating this watercolor. So it must have been incredibly galling to see this. Now, of course, von Peschke, once he completed the watercolor, he had given it to Robinson. He had not given it to Ellingson. It belonged to the excavation. So technically, Robinson did own it, but I can't imagine how she must have felt to have seen this then once she opened up the cover of this particular book. As I said, we don't have any evidence for how she felt about seeing her master's thesis in print with his name on it. We do, however, have evidence for how she felt about his publication of her dissertation. I became really kind of obsessed with this whole project, as my wife Chris can testify. Poor Chris. And I think it reached its worst point. My obsession reached its worst point when we got to one spring break, and I said, "Hey, honey, let's go to Oxford, Mississippi, to go through the David Robinson papers in the University of Mississippi archives for spring break. Wouldn't that be fun?" To her credit, she said yes. So we are still married. She hasn't filed for divorce yet. However, it's good that I brought her along. So we started going through all of these papers. There are tons of papers there. And there were lots of letters. And we found a lot of letters, correspondence between Ellingson and Robinson. The two had remained friends. They seem to have been fast friends from the moment they met in 1930 up until his death in 1957. However, Chris found the two really exciting letters. The first one, we're working away. I was sitting across the table from her. I remember this vividly. She slides this letter over to me. She says, "Read this." It was a letter from Mary Ellingson. It was addressed to David Robinson. The date was October 7th, 1952. And in it, she says, and I think this is a quote, "I was surprised to see my dissertation in print." One week later, on October 14th, he replied to her, and this is just an excerpt, but I think the most important part of this letter. He wrote, "I was very glad to use your good material, and probably should have given you more credit, but I had to change many things and to do a lot more work on it, as you noticed." I doubt she noticed, since 95% of his text repeats exactly what she wrote, but yeah, that's what he said. It's not the last part of that letter that is the most interesting. It's this middle part right here. "I probably should have given you more credit." He was a proud man. Actually, proud is too tame a word. He was an arrogant man. Everybody who knew him said that. And he did not apologize for anything. And so I know this is a very tepid apology, but for someone who's never done it before, that's pretty impressive. You have to admit. And I think it's a testament to their relationship. They really were good friends. And I think he wanted to preserve that friendship. He knew he had made a mistake. He knew he had gone too far. He knew she was angry. And he wanted to try and repair that damage. One other bit of evidence we found, by the way, that shows what good friends they were prior to this. I don't know what happened after 1952, after he published her dissertation, but prior to that, he'd actually come here to Evansville. David Robinson came to Evansville just to visit her. I know at least once, it might have been more than once. So they really did have a very tight relationship, which I think is pretty interesting. There's one other way I think he actually tried to apologize to her in his own rather proud way. In mid-December of 1952, so just 2 months after he wrote those words, that tepid apology, 2 months after that, a portrait of him was unveiled at the University of Mississippi. He was working at the University of Mississippi then. The folks there, the administration there, had decided they wanted to have a portrait of him. So they actually hired a very famous portrait painter, brought him to Oxford, Mississippi, a guy by the name of Stanislaw Rimsky. And I don't know when Robinson sat for the portrait. I couldn't find any evidence about that. But I figure it had to have been in the month or two prior to the unveiling of the finished painting. And I really strongly think that as he was discussing with Rimsky how he wanted to be portrayed and what symbols of his accomplishments that he wanted included in the portrait, this fight that he had had with Ellingson was on his mind. Guilt was actually on his mind. Now, a couple of things that he told Rimsky to include in this portrait. One, he had a private collection of antiquities, and he was really proud. This was this head of a satyr. That's the most proud possession he had in his collection of antiquities. Also in his collection of antiquities was this mosaic. I want you to notice that there is a man right here. He's actually labeled. Who knows their Greek? Or is it too far away?
Achilles.
Achilles, very good. Yes. You get an A for the day. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a woman right here. All right, that's harder because that's sort of destroyed.
Yeah, I can't read that one.
That's Thetis. Who's Thetis?
Achilles' mom.
His mom, yeah, Achilles' mom. So there's a standing woman there. She's labeled. There's Achilles. He's seated. Two other things I want you to notice. See the sea monster right here? Notice the spikes on the back of the neck and the spikes that are right here by its tail. So he wanted to include this mosaic as well, and he also wanted to be represented in his academic robes. He was proud of being a professor, and he was proud of all the students he had taught. So he wanted that to be included as one of his accomplishments. And then, of course, what he wanted to be highlighted second, after his face, of course, was an excavation at Olympus volume, because that's what he was most proud of. That was his biggest accomplishment, and even he recognized that. This, then, is the portrait that Rimsky came up with. So you'll notice he's in his academic robes. Can you see the mosaic in the background?
Yeah.
Well, you have better eyes than I do. You see the spiky tail back there? There's the spiky tail, and that's the standing woman, isn't it? And there's the seated man. It actually says Thetis right there. The satyr's right there. He's in his academic robes, and there in his lap is an excavation at Olympus volume. However, he had to have chosen which volume would be represented. His hand is covering up the volume number, but you can see the frontispiece, which I assume you've recognized by now. It is Georg von Peschke's watercolor of the painted terracotta that Ellingson found. This is an extraordinary painting because the one thing that's representing his greatest accomplishment in life is the volume he didn't write. That is a fact. The question is then, how do you explain this? He knew this. He chose this on purpose. How do you explain this? We can't ask him. So I have a theory, and you can't prove me wrong because he's right. What I think he was doing is he was using Rimsky to embed a secret message in this painting. And I think he had one person in mind as the audience for this secret message, and that was Mary Ellingson. He wanted her to see this and understand the message that while he certainly had done a lot of accomplishments and was an accomplished man, he couldn't have done it without her. A lot of his success was built on her work. That's the symbolism I think he wanted her to see. So I do think there's a secret message in this painting. And just in case you think I've gone too far, I have one more piece of evidence. Just to make sure that she got this message, he put a full color reproduction on a Christmas card and mailed it to her for the next season. And you see, you can recognize the figurine right there, the watercolor of the figurine. I've actually held this in my hand, I've looked at it, and it's really obvious. It's big enough that you have no problem recognizing it. She would have recognized it immediately. There's no question in my mind she would have recognized it immediately. I have mentioned this theory. I was just at a conference in early January and talked about this theory. And somebody in the audience actually brought up an interesting point. They said maybe that was his point with Ellingson in mind as audience, but they said, don't you think he had two audiences in mind? There was Ellingson and then there's everybody else in the world, because anybody else looking at this portrait is going to say, oh look, it's an excavation at Olympus volume. That's what he's most proud of. He wrote that. So he's almost reclaiming it, isn't he? And saying it is his own. Also at this conference during the question and answer period, some people pointed out that his hand is actually covering the author of the volume, and they were wondering if that also is trying to, say he's not the author and trying to make her feel better in a way that nobody else would have recognized. So it's an interesting idea. Well, after all of this, I got very excited. I thought I had a terrific story, so I wrote the whole thing up. I had copious footnotes, the scholarly article. I sent it off to a scholarly journal, a classical archaeology journal, and the editor immediately sent back a very polite note. It was just 3 lines long, and basically she said, we don't think our readers would find this interesting. She did not send it off to peer reviewers, to the anonymous reviewers, as usually happens in these cases, which made me think I'd written a really bad article. So I reworked it, tried to make it more interesting. Not sure how you do that, but and I sent it off then to another classical archaeology journal. This time the editor did send it off to 3 anonymous reviewers. They sent back their reviews to the editor read them over, and they all basically said the exact same thing. They came to the same conclusion, with which the editor said that he agreed. And he actually quoted one of the anonymous reviewers who said, there is no story here. They thought the whole thing was so trivial that it did not warrant publication. I tried again. I tried again. I tried again. I tried again. I was rejected by 11 different editors. 11 different editors and over 30 anonymous reviewers. That's hard. However, I didn't give up until the 11th one. They sent back the comments from the anonymous reviewers, and one of the anonymous reviewers actually said this, and the editor said that he concurred with it. What you're dealing with here is part of the unwritten history of classical archaeology. Best to leave it unwritten. Now I have to explain, I didn't know this going into all this, but what I discovered is there is a secret code among especially older archaeologists, American archaeologists who work in Greece. You do not criticize your intellectual ancestors. That's bad form. And so clearly this article made a lot of people very, very, very uncomfortable, which is why they wouldn't publish it. At this point, I'd run out of people to send my article to. So I gave up, especially after reading that. I realized nobody was ever going to publish it, which was pretty disheartening. However, I've been telling so many people this story that word had gotten out, and people were talking about it in the archaeological community, and they started inviting me to come lecture and tell her story, because if the editors didn't find it interesting, a lot of other people certainly found it interesting. I even then, for 2 years, was invited to be a lecturer with the Archaeological Institute of America. They sent me around the country, and when you're one of their lecturers, you have to offer to the chapters you go to 3 titles, 3 different lectures that you can deliver. I had one on Pompeii, I had one on a site I worked on in Spain, I had this Ellingson story. Pompeii, all right, we're talking Pompeii. That's like, that brings in the crowds. Everybody likes Pompeii. And nobody wanted Pompeii, they all wanted Ellingson. And so word was spreading about this. but still, I wasn't going to do anything with it. I had given up on the idea of publication until, unfortunately, I should not say unfortunately, fortunately, I received an email from Barbara. This was just a couple of years ago. She had heard about one of these lectures that I had given, and she sent me a very sweet email and just thanked me for keeping her mother's memory alive. Oh, man. Talk about guilt, you know? So I decided I had to give it one more try. I realized it was never going to be published as a journal article. That avenue was dead. So I figured the next thing to try was as a book. So I put together a book proposal, and then I started asking everybody I knew who had heard the story if they could think of an editor of somebody who might be interested in publishing this, who wouldn't slam the door in my face immediately as all the journal editors had. And I got the name of somebody, and several people recommended this woman. So I was actually pretty excited. I thought, maybe I have a shot here. This woman worked at Rowman and Littlefield. And so I sent off my book proposal, and unbeknownst to me, just 3 weeks before I sent it, she had gotten another job. However, as luck would have it, Rowman and Littlefield had an assistant editor who was, I assume, just supposed to warm the seat and, you know, open the mail, answer the phones, but not really supposed to do anything. But it just so happens that this assistant editor is on the impact banner that's just outside this building. Is Andrea Kendrick, who is here with us today as well. And this is a picture of her. If you, it's actually right out this way. If you leave, you might have walked, when you're coming, you might have walked under it, and you might walk under it as you leave. So you can see Andrea's smiling face. She was an archaeology major here. She was a student of mine. Here she is excavating in Greece. She certainly understood, had some understanding of Greek archaeology. So I didn't know it was going to land on her desk. She opened up the envelope and was quite surprised to see my name. But to her credit, she got very excited about it. She got excited about the project. She took it to the board of Rowman Littlefield, and she convinced them to publish this. So I really don't think this would have gotten published had it not wound up just by chance on her desk. This is the end result. It has finally been published. This is, of course, the cover of the book. And I must say I'm quite proud to finally see it in print after all of these years. Well, that's pretty much the whole story, in a nutshell, a nice summary of it. It has been quite an adventure since November of 2003 when I first pulled that photo album off the shelf, having no idea what it was I was about to find. There have been some very high highs and there have been some very, very low lows along that entire route. But in the end, I think it was all worth it. It was all worth it for two particular reasons. One reason is I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to help give Mary Ellingson her scholarly voice back. Just 2 weeks ago, a review of the book appeared in the Bryn Mawr Classical Review. Now, I know you all have your copies at home, but on the off chance you might not subscribe, let me just tell you that this is sort of the premier place that people publish reviews. It's one of the really important places that you learn about high quality scholarship and what's going on. The review was glowing, which I'm glad to say, but for me the most gratifying part of the review was that the reviewer actually called on Johns Hopkins University Press. They own the copyright to the excavation at Olympus volumes. And she called on them to change their listing, the author of Volume 7, to Mary Ellingson, and to list Mary Ellingson as a contributor to Volume 14. Now, they're not going to do that. I know that. I'm not that naive. But I really find it quite gratifying that others now are willing to acknowledge Mary Ellingson's contributions to the field of classical archaeology. That is pretty nice. The other thing is, it's Mary Ellingson herself. I feel very privileged, very lucky to have had the chance to get to know her. Now, I'm an archaeologist. I've got to know a lot of dead people in my day. But I have to say, she is the best of them all, certainly the most interesting. She was a woman of grace. She was certainly dignified. She was witty. She had great observational skills, very smart, very well educated. Just a delightful woman to have had the chance to get to know, even if it was only through her letters and through her photographs. So that also has certainly made it worth it. Thank you.
This is the artwork donated by Barbara Peterson, the daughter of Mary Ellingson. It's a scrapbook, adventure mystery. She is a former professor here at U of E, and we just heard the lecture about her archaeology digs in Greece near Mount Olympus and on housing. Some of these photographs were in Dr. Kaiser's lectures, but we have some of the original sculptures that she brought back, and these are donated by her daughter Barbara. And this is a picture of Ellingson over there in Greece. This is some of the figurines that she brought back. These are in the University of Evansville library for the next week or so. But you see these little figurines that she was so proud of that you just saw in the movie, and these are donated by her daughter. There's the famous watercolor, the terracotta figure, and the pottery and sherds brought back from Greece that are property of University of Evansville, donated by Miss Peterson.